Sarah slammed her palm against the mahogany table, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the silent atrium. "I am in charge now," she declared, firing me publicly to make an example of me. "Hand over all company property." The junior analysts held their breath as I stood slowly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy brass ring. I just slid her the campus keys across the polished wood. Sarah smirked, clutching the metal tight, unaware she had just triggered a silent countdown. The silence that followed was heavy with the scent of ozone and expensive cologne. Sarah did not notice the small red light on the server door blinking from green to amber. She was too busy preening for the security cameras, her shoulders high and rigid with unearned victory. I straightened my tie, feeling the strange lightness of a man who no longer carries a burden. My colleagues looked away, terrified that my bad luck was contagious. She thought she won, but the building was already breathing differently. By noon, the glass fortress began to sweat. The central cooling system, a complex beast I had tamed for a decade, hummed with a low, agonizing vibration. Sarah tried to enter the executive wing using the brass keys, but the digital readers hummed a flat, metallic rejection. The physical metal was useless without my hourly biometric pulse registered at the main gate. She jammed the key into the lock, snapping the tip off with a jagged crack. Behind the walls, the server temperatures began to climb toward a terminal limit. The firm's lead lawyer, Mr. Henderson, arrived as the fire alarms started their rhythmic, piercing wail. He found Sarah in the boardroom, frantically shouting into a dead desk phone while the board members watched in stunned silence. The air was thick and humid, smelling of scorched plastic and desperation. Henderson ignored her tantrums and walked straight to the server console. He saw the empty chair where I usually sat. Every screen displayed a single, flashing prompt for a root user authorization that no longer existed. The board members shifted in their seats, wiping sweat from their brows as the emergency lights bathed the room in a sickly crimson. Henderson looked at Sarah in front of the board and asked quietly, "You fired Joe and then he gave you the keys." Her face just froze, the realization finally piercing her thick armor of ego. She gripped the broken brass ring until her knuckles turned white. Henderson shook his head, looking at the dead monitors. He knew the federal contracts required a live custodian at all times. I watched the evacuation from the park across the street, sipping a cold coffee while sirens wailed in the distance. My phone buzzed with 17 missed calls from the founder, but I simply let them slide into the void. The building was officially a hollow shell, a billion-dollar paperweight. Sarah had demanded the symbols of power, so I had given them to her. Now she had to explain to the auditors why the vault was sealed from the inside. The keys were finally hers to keep. The streetlights flickered as the first cooling fans in the server wing died. I watched the emergency strobes paint the glass tower in rhythmic flashes of orange. My phone vibrated against the metal park bench, a relentless mechanical insect. It was Marcus from IT, likely panicking about the root certificate timeout. I ignored the call and tightened my scarf against the biting wind. The objective was simple now. I needed to disappear before the legal team realized the true cost. Rain began to fall, turning the pavement into a dark mirror. I stood up and walked toward the subway entrance, my boots clicking on the wet stone. Every step felt like shedding a layer of old skin. Behind me, the building was a dying giant. Without the biometric handshake, the encrypted drives would soon begin their permanent self-destruction. This was the mid-scene turn I had hidden in the code. Sarah held the brass keys, but the digital vault was melting. A black sedan pulled up to the curb with a sharp screech of tires. The passenger window rolled down to reveal Mr. Henderson's grim face. "Joe, get in the car," he commanded, his voice tight with barely contained terror. I kept walking, my hands deep in my pockets. "The board is offering a 5-fold increase to your previous salary." I stopped and looked at him through the rain. Their money cannot buy back the trust Sarah shattered this morning. Henderson stepped out of the vehicle, his expensive suit getting soaked. "We are facing a total infrastructure collapse," he whispered. "The federal data is currently unreachable, and the secondary cooling loops are failing." I checked my watch and saw the time. "You have exactly 20 minutes before the thermal sensors trigger a hard wipe." Sarah should have read the manual before she made her grand speech. Henderson flinched as a distant explosion echoed from the roof of the tower. The pressure was visible in the way the lawyer gripped his umbrella. He knew I was the only person who could bridge the gap between the hardware and the law. Sarah is already gone, he admitted, his eyes scanning the dark street for witnesses. The founder signed her termination papers 10 minutes ago. I finally smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. Firing her does not fix the biometric mismatch. The system thinks the campus is under attack. We stood in the rain as the sirens grew louder in the distance. The obstacle was no longer Sarah, but the sheer physics of the cooling failure. I can stop the wipe, I said, but the price is not just a higher salary. I want the deed to the off-site backup facility. Henderson hesitated, his mind calculating the massive loss against my demand. The building gave a low groan as the primary power grid finally buckled under the heat. I turned my back on him and started walking down the stairs into the subway. The micro twist was already in motion. I did not need their money because I had the only surviving copy of the client list. My phone buzzed one last time with a message from an unknown number. It was the founder, begging me to name any price. I tossed the device into a trash bin and stepped onto the waiting train. The game had just changed. The train rattled through the dark tunnel, vibrating against my ribs. I sat in the corner, staring at my empty hands. The brass keys were gone, but the digital ghost of the firm still haunted my mind. My objective was to secure the off-site backup facility before Henderson regained his composure. I needed that physical server rack to finalize my leverage. Without it, the client list was just a list of names. I felt the cold metal of the subway pole. The next stop was a blurred streak of white tile and grime. I stepped off the train and checked my secondary phone. A new obstacle appeared in my notifications. The facility's power grid had been remotely locked by the board. They were trying to starve the servers of electricity to force a manual reset. I walked faster, my breath hitching in the damp air. If the power dropped, the encryption keys would rotate. I would lose everything in the dark. I reached the industrial elevator and swiped a hidden plastic card. The lift groaned upward, smelling of grace and old electricity. When the doors opened, the mid-scene turn hit me. Marcus was already there, huddled over a flickering terminal. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and terrified. Sarah told me to wipe the drives, he whispered. I saw his hand hovering over the kill switch. He was not following her orders. He was looking for a way out of the fire. I walked toward him, keeping my voice low and steady. Marcus, she is already fired, I said. He shook his head, pointing at the screen. The founder is on the line. He says if I do not purge the data, I am going to prison. I realized then that the power balance had shifted again. The board was not just scared, they were scorched. They wanted the evidence of their negligence deleted before the federal auditors arrived tomorrow morning. The cooling fans in the small room screamed like jet engines. I stepped closer, blocking his view of the monitor. You know I have the only surviving backup, I told him. If you press that button, you are destroying their liability, but you are also killing your own future. Marcus hesitated, his fingers trembling above the keys. The pressure in the room was physical, a wall of heat and noise. He looked at me, searching for a promise I could not keep. I reached out and placed my hand over his. We are going to walk out of here together, I promised. He slowly pulled his hand back, his face wet with sweat. I quickly typed a command to divert the remaining power to the primary core. The screens flickered, then stabilized. We had the data, but the building's alarms began to chime in a new, frantic pattern. Someone was coming up the service stairs. We had less than 2 minutes left. We grabbed the portable drives and headed for the fire exit. The micro twist came as I pushed the door open. The street below was crawling with federal vehicles, not company security. They were not here to help the founder or Sarah. The audit had started 12 hours early. I realized the client list was no longer a bargaining chip for a new job. It was now evidence in a criminal investigation. My leverage had suddenly turned into a heavy, glowing target. Rain lashed against the rusted fire escape as we descended toward the alley. Blue and red strobes illuminated the falling droplets, turning the world into a chaotic mosaic. My objective was simple: reach my car before the federal agents sealed the perimeter. Marcus clutched the portable drives to his chest like a holy relic. The weight of the evidence felt heavier than the hardware. Every siren blast tightened the knot in my stomach. We were running out of shadows to hide in. The primary obstacle loomed at the alley mouth in the form of a black SUV. Two agents stepped out, their flashlights cutting through the gloom like white sabers. I pulled Marcus behind a dumpster, the stench of wet cardboard filling my lungs. The pressure was suffocating as the beams swept closer to our position. If they caught us with the drives, the story would belong to the government. We needed a diversion or a miracle. My heart hammered against my ribs. Suddenly, the mid-scene turn arrived via a muffled explosion from the roof. The cooling system had finally detonated, sending a shower of sparks into the dark sky. The agents looked up, distracted by the sudden pyrotechnics. I grabbed Marcus by the sleeve and sprinted toward the side street. The power balance shifted as the chaos grew. For a moment, the law was looking at the fire instead of the thieves. We reached the sedan just as the streetlights died. The engine roared to life, a low growl in the storm. I checked the rearview mirror, expecting a chase. Instead, I saw Mr. Henderson standing under a street lamp, soaking wet and utterly defeated. He didn't move to stop us. He simply watched as we pulled away from the curb. The realization hit me then. He wasn't the enemy anymore. He was a witness to a corpse. The company was gone. Only the data remained. I shifted into third gear and drove. The pressure eased as we crossed the bridge, but Marcus remained silent. He stared at the drives in his lap with a hollow expression. "Joe, what happens when they find out we have the compliance logs?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. We are the only ones who can prove Sarah acted on the board's orders. This was the leverage I had wanted, but it felt like a curse. The silence in the car was deafening. We arrived at my safe house, a nondescript apartment near the docks. I hauled the drives inside and set them on the kitchen table. Marcus collapsed into a chair, his face pale under the fluorescent light. The objective was complete, but the cost was rising. I looked at the logs and saw a name I didn't expect. The founder hadn't just known about the negligence. He had personally authorized the bypass that caused the final fire. The betrayal ran deep. A soft knock at the door shattered the brief moment of calm. I reached for a heavy flashlight, my breath held. It wasn't the feds or Henderson. A small envelope was slid under the door, sealed with a familiar wax stamp. Inside was a single key to a private vault and a handwritten note from Sarah. I realized the micro-twist was just beginning. She hadn't been the pawn, she was the architect. She had fired me to save me from the coming explosion. I stared at the wax-sealed envelope while Marcus paced the narrow kitchen. My objective was to verify Sarah's claim without leading the authorities to our door. If she had truly fired me as a shield, the narrative was backwards. The primary obstacle was the growing fear in Marcus's eyes. He looked ready to crack under the fluorescent hum. Every distant siren felt like a personal threat to his sanity. I needed him steady to decrypt the final layer of the drives. The pressure mounted as I broke the seal and read the messy scrawl. Sarah claimed the founder was liquidating assets into offshore accounts using my forged credentials. I grabbed my laptop to cross-reference the transfer logs we had recovered. The mid-scene turn hit when I found the digital signatures. They weren't just forgeries. They were perfect replicas of my biometric key, stamped weeks before I was fired. The betrayal was deeper than a simple job loss. I was already the fall guy. Marcus stopped pacing and peered over my shoulder at the glowing screen. "Those transactions are massive," he whispered, his voice cracking with dread. I traced the routing numbers through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The power balance shifted as I realized Sarah wasn't just an architect. She was a witness who had lost her nerve. She didn't fire me to be cruel. She did it to break the chain of command before the final theft. I picked up the private vault key from the table. It was heavy, cold, and etched with a local bank's logo. My objective was now clear. I had to get to that vault before the feds froze all private assets. Sarah had hidden something physical that the digital logs couldn't show. Marcus gripped his coat, his face pale and sweat-streaked. "We can't go out there, Joe," he pleaded. I ignored him and grabbed my car keys. The clock was ticking. We drove through the industrial district, avoiding the main arteries where the police sat. The obstacles were everywhere, from traffic cameras to the guilt weighing on my chest. I had spent a decade building a fortress for a man who used me as a shield. The realization was a bitter pill that tasted like copper. I pushed the car faster, weaving through the late-night delivery trucks. Marcus remained silent, clutching the portable drives like a life vest in a storm. The bank was a stone monolith standing silent against the rain. I used the service entrance, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The mid-scene turn occurred in the dimly lit hallway. I saw Mr. Henderson's car parked in the shadows behind a dumpster. He wasn't waiting for the feds. He was waiting for me. I realized then that Henderson was playing both sides of the board. He needed the contents of that vault to save himself. We reached the safety deposit boxes just as the heavy doors groaned shut. I inserted the key and turned it with a sharp, metallic click. The micro twist waited inside the small metal drawer. It wasn't money or more drives. It was a digital recorder and a series of photos showing the founder meeting with our biggest competitor. Sarah hadn't just saved me. She had documented a corporate coup. But the last photo was of me, standing in a warehouse I did not recognize. The image felt like a ghost. I stared at the photograph of myself in that unknown warehouse. The grainy image showed me holding a crate marked with the company logo. I had no memory of this moment. My primary objective shifted instantly. I had to find that location before the feds linked me to the illegal hardware. The pressure intensified as Marcus pointed to the timestamp on the photo. It was dated last Tuesday. I was at my desk all day. Someone had used a deepfake or a very convincing double. Henderson stepped out from the shadows of the vault room. His leather shoes clicked rhythmically on the cold marble floor. He looked at the photo in my hand and sighed. "You were never meant to see that, Joe," he said. His voice was devoid of its usual legal polish. He held a silenced pistol at his side, aimed loosely at the floor. The power balance shifted as Marcus backed away into the safety deposit boxes. Henderson was not just a witness. He was the cleanup crew. The air in the vault grew stagnant and heavy. Henderson explained that the warehouse was a staging ground for the stolen equipment. The founder needed a physical trail that led directly to a rogue employee. I realized my meticulous reputation was being used against me. A loyal worker makes the perfect fall guy. I gripped the photo until the paper crinkled. Marcus was trembling, his eyes darting toward the heavy vault door. We were trapped in a steel box with a man paid to erase us. I slid the photograph into my jacket pocket slowly. The mid-scene turn came when Henderson's phone chirped with an emergency alert. He glanced down, his grip on the weapon loosening for a fraction of a second. I lunged forward, swinging the heavy metal drawer at his head. The impact was dull and sickening. He staggered back, the gun clattering onto the floor. I didn't stop to check his pulse. I grabbed Marcus and bolted for the exit. We had to move before his backup arrived. We burst into the rainy night, our lungs burning from the sprint. The warehouse address was etched into the back of the photo. It was in the old shipping district by the pier. We reached the car and tore away from the curb. The primary obstacle was the black SUV following us 3 blocks behind. They were not hiding anymore. The pursuit was loud and desperate. I pushed the sedan to its limit, weaving through the narrow industrial alleys. The city felt like a trap. The warehouse loomed ahead like a rusted iron tomb. I killed the headlights and rolled to a stop behind a stack of shipping containers. Marcus was hyperventilating, clutching the portable drives. "We have to call the feds," he whispered. I shook my head and pointed to the black SUV entering the lot. "If we call them now, they find us with the evidence and the stolen gear. We have to flip the script. We need to get inside and find the real signatures." We slipped through a broken side window, the smell of salt and diesel filling the air. The interior was cavernous and filled with stacks of server racks. These were the primary assets Sarah said were being liquidated. I found a terminal in the corner and plugged in my bypass kit, using the login I had cached earlier. The screen flickered to life, showing a live link to the offshore accounts. The power balance tilted. I finally had access to the master ledger. The founder's secret was laid bare in glowing green text. I began the upload, sending the data to a secure cloud server. Marcus watched the door, his hand gripping a lead pipe. The turn happened when I opened the last file. It wasn't just a ledger. It was a recorded video of Sarah. She was sitting in this very chair, speaking to the camera. "Joe, if you are reading this, I am already dead," she said. My heart stopped. She hadn't been the architect. She had been the first victim of the founder's desperate greed. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Sarah's firing of me was a desperate, final act of protection. She knew the warehouse was a death sentence. The pressure was now a crushing weight. I heard the warehouse door creak open, the sound of heavy boots echoing on the concrete. The men from the SUV were inside. I saw the red laser dot of a sniper's scope dancing across the server racks. We were out of time and out of luck. I looked at Marcus and saw the terror in his eyes. He knew we wouldn't both make it out. The micro twist came when the terminal beeped. The upload was complete, but it hadn't gone to the cloud. It had been intercepted by a third party. A message flashed on the screen from the firm's biggest competitor. "Thank you for the data, Joe. We will take it from here." I realized then that I had been played by everyone. I was just the delivery boy. The red laser dot traced a slow path across the server rack, barely visible in the dusty air. My objective was to kill the terminal link before the competitor drained the offshore accounts. If they took the money, I would be left with a warehouse full of evidence and no bargaining chip. I lunged for the Ethernet cable, my fingers catching the plastic clip. The primary obstacle was Marcus. He had frozen in place, staring at Sarah's flickering image on the screen. He was paralyzed by the grief. The heavy boots of the hitman crunched on the grit nearby. I yanked the cable, and the terminal went dark with a final, electronic chirp. The pressure intensified as a voice boomed through the warehouse rafters. "We know you are here, Joe," the man shouted. It was the founder. He sounded desperate, his voice cracking with a high, jagged edge. I realized he wasn't just here for the drives. He was here to burn the evidence personally. He held a burning flare. I pulled Marcus behind a stack of shipping crates, just as the first flare ignited. The magnesium light was blinding, casting long, distorted shadows against the corrugated steel walls. The power balance shifted when I noticed a control panel for the overhead crane. If I could reach it, I could drop the heavy server racks and block the only exit. I started crawling toward the wall, keeping my head low. The floor was cold and smelled of old oil and rust. The founder moved closer, his footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. "Why did you have to keep digging, Joe?" he asked. "You were the only one I trusted to be quiet." I saw the glint of a handgun in his other hand. The mid-scene turn arrived when a second flare landed near the server racks. The insulation on the old cables began to smoke and hiss. The warehouse was becoming a furnace. I reached the panel and grabbed the joystick. I felt the vibration. The crane groaned to life, its heavy chains rattling in the dark. I swung the massive hook toward a stack of high-end servers. The hitman fired at the ceiling, trying to hit the motor, but the height protected the machinery. The power shifted as the first rack tipped over with a deafening crash. It blocked the path of the hitmen, trapping them in the rear section. The founder screamed in rage as the smoke thickened around him. He was losing his grip. I signaled for Marcus to run toward the loading dock. He finally moved, his face a mask of pure terror. We reached the heavy sliding door, but it was padlocked from the outside. The obstacle was a solid sheet of steel between us and the rainy night. I looked for a heavy tool to break the latch. The pressure was suffocating now, the heat from the burning servers licking at our backs. I saw a fire axe behind a glass case. I smashed the glass with my elbow. The shards shattered, the sound lost in the roar of the fire. I grabbed the axe and swung at the padlock. Sparks flew, but the steel held firm. On the second swing, the wood handle splintered in my hands. I cursed and threw the broken tool aside. The turn happened when the loading door suddenly groaned and began to rise. Someone was opening it from the exterior. I expected more gunmen, but it was Mr. Henderson. He looked pale and utterly exhausted. He stood there with a heavy bolt cutter, his expensive suit ruined by the soot. "Get out, now," he barked, pointing toward the street. He wasn't helping us because of loyalty. He saw the federal agents approaching from the pier. The power balance was gone. Everyone was just trying to survive the incoming wreckage. We scrambled under the rising door and onto the wet asphalt. The cold rain felt like a blessing against my scorched skin. I turned to look back. The warehouse was a glowing orange beacon in the dark. I saw the founder silhouetted against the flames for a brief second before the roof collapsed. He was gone along with the physical evidence of the double. Marcus collapsed on the curb, gasping for air while clutching the portable drives. The objective was achieved, but the victory felt hollow and cold. We were safe, but the firm was a memory. Then I saw a figure stepping from the shadows, Sarah was standing by a nondescript gray van. She wasn't dead. The video had been a lure to bring the founder and the hitman into the warehouse trap. She had used my meticulous nature to ensure I would bring the federal data to this exact spot. I realized then that she had been the architect all along. She had sacrificed the firm and the founder to clear the board. Now she was looking at me, and she held a gun. Sarah lowered the weapon, her eyes reflecting the orange glow of the dying warehouse. I stood frozen on the wet pavement, my objective shifting from survival to simple understanding. The rain washed the suit from my face in cold, jagged streaks. "Why the gun, Sarah?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She did not answer. Instead, she tossed a small flash drive at my feet. It clattered against the asphalt. "That is the truth about the campus keys," she said. The drive was the final piece of the puzzle I had been missing. The primary obstacle was my own loyalty to a ghost. I realized that the keys I handed Sarah in the atrium were never meant for her. They were a signal to the offshore servers to begin a total liquidation. I had been the trigger, and she was the hammer. The pressure of the realization made my lungs feel tight. I looked at Marcus, who was still weeping silently. I picked up the drive, its metal casing freezing in my hand. The mid-scene turn arrived when Sarah looked toward the sirens. "I am not the architect, Joe," she admitted. "I am the cleanup." She pointed the gun at the gray van, where a dark figure sat in the driver's seat. It was the firm's rival, the one who had intercepted my upload. They had not been a third party. They were the ones who had hired Sarah from the start. The power balance shattered as the van door slid open. The rival executive stepped out, holding a tablet that displayed the offshore account balances. Everything was at zero. The money was gone, but it had not gone to them. It had been rerouted to a blind trust in my name. I felt a cold surge of dread. They did not want the money anymore. They wanted a scapegoat for the theft. Sarah had painted a target on my back. Sarah's hand trembled, the weapon finally dipping toward the ground. She was not a killer, just a desperate woman caught in a corporate war. I realized then that the public firing was her only way to give me an alibi. If I was out of the building, I could not be the thief. But the blind trust changed the math. Henderson was watching us from the shadows, his face a mask of calculation. He knew the feds would follow the money. I looked at the drive and then at the burning warehouse. The micro twist was the only move I had left. The drive was not a record of the theft. It was a kill switch for the entire blind trust. If I plugged it in, the money would vanish forever, leaving everyone with nothing but debt. Sarah saw the look in my eyes and stepped back. The feds were 20 feet away. I shoved the drive into the sewer grate and smiled.